Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Oil tumbles and stocks surge as the US and Iran agree to a 2-week ceasefire if Tehran reopens the Strait of Hormuz. But a path to a permanent deal remains unclear. President Trump says the US will help ease congestion in the vital waterway as the agreement is said to allow Iran and Oman to charge transit fees on ships. Plus, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu backs the pause on strikes on Iran, but says the truce does not include Lebanon. We'll bring you the latest throughout the hour. Well, a very good morning, everybody. Checking in on these markets, and it is a relief picture across equities this morning. Already up nearly 5% on the MSCI Asia Pacific Index. Take a look at the relief, though, here in Europe. We're up more than 5%, and S&P E-minis stateside also up nearly 2.5%. Flip the board cross-asset, and we've seen oil plunging the most in 6 years. Both WTI and Brent below $100 a barrel. Brent now down more than 13%. And as we see the revival of Fed cut bets, we've seen treasuries rallying across the curve. 4.23 on the 10-year at the moment, and that prospect of rate cuts also boosting gold, up more than 2% at $4,803 a troy ounce. Now, let's take a look at the risk events on the docket for today. At 7 a.m. London time, we've got German factory orders. 10 a.m. we get euro area retail sales numbers, and 7 p.m. London time, it's those latest Fed minutes. So let's get you started and ready for the day ahead. We begin with the global relief rally. Asian markets welcoming the ceasefire as oil slumps. Let's see that price action with Winnie Xu in Taipei. Winnie, what are you watching?
Yeah, morning, Lizzie. We're looking at really significant moves in Asia with that 2-week ceasefire. And, well, there is lots of support for markets with exception in oil and also the dollar. So just as you mentioned, we're looking at oil prices plunging. And that is, we're talking about the WTI and Brent also seeing premium narrowing as well, given that the geopolitical risk is easing. Now, investors are really questioning right now if this is the start of a permanent ceasefire and if the Strait of Hormuz will actually open as expected. Now, you flip the board and take a look at the broader Asian market and see how that lower oil price is supporting Asian stocks. We're talking about the MSCI Asia here up close to 5%, and that is its biggest gain in about 5 weeks. We're just about now 5% away from erasing all losses since the war began. And leading gains today, you're looking at the Korea's Kospi Index, Japan's Nikkei 225, and also technology sectors that actually saw the biggest impact since the war began. You also flip the board and take a look at cross-asset impact because we're looking at the weaker dollar actually supporting overall Asia's currencies. The Korean won actually jumped about 2% and having its best days since December, while the Japanese yen moving away from that 160 level against the dollar. In terms of yields, really dropping across the board as these inflationary concerns continue to ease. Back to you, Lizzie.
Winnie, thank you very much. That's Winnie Xu in Taipei. Now, that's what's happening in Asia, but futures on both sides of the Atlantic are also surging on the risk-on mood. Treasuries and gold jumping too. Let's bring in Bloomberg MLive strategist Mark Cranfield for more. Mark, no part of the market seemingly untouched by this relief rally. What's catching your eye?
Well, I think you have to go with those European futures. I mean, I can't even remember the last time that we saw Eurostoxx futures up 5% during Asian trading. That's really quite extraordinary. Not only that, but French government bond futures, which don't trade very much in Asia, usually up more than 2 points, biggest move for 3 years. So some extraordinary moves, even when you discount what's going on with the Asian markets, which you would expect anyway. It's obviously setting up for a pretty exciting day in European markets today, and obviously currencies as well. Euro is doing pretty well, although the star performer today is the New Zealand dollar. The central bank left the rates unchanged, but were relatively hawkish. So the Kiwis leading all the moves within the G10 currencies as well. So wherever you look, as you say, the correlations, which really got broken down when the war started. They're all starting to come back together now as people cover positioning which they had and starting to be a bit more optimistic about some of the positions they can take for the near future. So equity is obviously at the forefront of that, but some pretty substantial moves in bond markets as well. We've seen Treasury yields down about 5 basis points at the long end of the curve, which again is a very substantial move in Asia. We don't normally see those kind of things going on. So wherever you look, and as Winnie was mentioning, oil prices as well, massive moves in the oil complex, and we haven't even got down into the trading range which we had before the war started. There's a lot further to unravel. If the conditions stay right, some of these moves could extend for quite a while.
Mark, thank you very much. That's Bloomberg MLive strategist Mark Cranfield. Well, let's dive into the geopolitics now behind those market moves. The US and Iran having agreed to a 2-week ceasefire, sending oil prices lower and lifting global stocks, as we've been hearing. It's a temporary reprieve for the region, buying time for the two sides to reach a longer agreement to end the war. Well, US President Donald Trump announced the truce on social media, but cautioned the pause hinges on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's foreign minister said safe passage through the waterway will be possible during that time, vowing that Iran will cease defensive operations if attacks are paused. Pakistan, a key mediator, meanwhile, says that it'll host talks on Friday, though the US is yet to confirm its attendance. For more, I'm joined by Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison and Bloomberg's Horizons Middle East and Africa anchor Germana Basecci. Welcome to you both. Laura, I want to start with you. What do we know about the terms of the ceasefire? How did it get over the line when previously Iran had rejected the idea of a temporary pause? And when does it begin?
Yeah, so this ceasefire agreement has two big pieces. One is that the U.S. and Israel will agree to halt strikes on Iran in exchange for Iran agreeing to open up the Strait of Hormuz to traffic from oil tankers and others, some 800 vessels that have been backed up there. This is all very tenuous, and the details are still emerging and yet unclear. Any of the sort of subsequent details, things about the future of Iran, their nuclear capabilities, their ballistic missile arsenal, all of these details have still yet to be worked out. But for now, those are the two pieces that were able to come together. A White House official says that J.D. Vance was actually very instrumental in putting this deal together, that he was sort of the instrumental linchpin. He, of course, has been one of the least enthusiastic members of the Trump administration about these Iran talks. The administration has really put him forward as one of the more palatable negotiators with the Iranian side. Pakistan served as a middle ground here. So a lot to happen over the course of what is a relatively short ceasefire period, just 14 days that they've agreed to stop the fighting for now.
Germana, this isn't just a war between the US and Iran. Will fighting stop on all fronts? Because we've heard from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the deal doesn't cover Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that seems to contradict what Pakistan said earlier.
Well, you raise a very important point here, Lizzie, which is whether all parties are going to subscribe to the terms of the ceasefire. And at this point, we don't know whether the ceasefire is actually going to translate to a durable peace resolution. That is the big question in everyone's minds today. You're right. About an hour ago, the Israeli Prime Minister did say that he supports the U.S.'s efforts with the ceasefire, the 2-week ceasefire, but that it does not apply to Hezbollah. And herein lies the issue, because as Laura was saying, Iran have put forward their counter terms, their counter proposals of what they would like to see. Overnight, the National Supreme Security Council of Iran published 10 points, a very long missive that they published. And included in those points, other than the full lifting of sanctions, the end of hostilities, the withdrawal of U.S. from bases in the region, and control of the strait, obviously many of those are non-starters for the U.S., they've also stipulated that the war against all of their components of the so-called axis of resistance should be halted immediately. And there, of course, they're explicitly referring to their crown jewel in the axis of resistance, and that is Hezbollah, the ongoing active front between between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And if you look at the evolution of ground troops just over the last couple of days, what has happened actually is quite the opposite. Just in the last 24 hours, Israel have deployed yet another ground division to expand what they would say is a security zone or buffer zone in the southern part of Lebanon. They've got about 50,000 committed troops in the southern part of Lebanon. Airstrikes are continuing. And of course, this has led to a massive displacement of citizens within Lebanon, over 1.1 million per the United Nations. So it is unclear at this point whether this stance from Israel's perspective and their ambition to continue going with the war with Hezbollah can actually stymie efforts to translate the broader ceasefire in the region into one that is more long-lasting.
So, Laura, what's next then for peace talks?
Yeah, so Pakistan, who's really served as a key intermediary for the past 5 or 6 weeks of this conflict or so, has invited all sides to come to Islamabad on Friday to sit down and hash out what a more durable peace plan would look like. I'll note the White House has not yet confirmed their attendance. Carolyn Levitt, the press secretary, has said those details are still being worked out, so it's not clear exactly when or where all sides will sit down. I'll note that, with just a 14-day timeline, any delay there could, prove to be problematic for getting a lasting deal in that short 2-week period. This also really just underscores how tenuous everything is. This came together very quickly, really just in a couple hours, in Tuesday, over to the course of the day, Tuesday in the U.S. And there's a lot that still needs to be worked out, much of less just where they're going to sit down and have these initial phases of talks.
And Jemana, apart from the fact that the two sides have come to the table, what seems to have provoked such relief in markets is that this includes the Strait of Hormuz. What details do we have on how vessels will make it through the passageway?
Yeah, well, we actually don't have a lot of details. And this is why I think many oil traders this morning, many involved in the energy market, are treating it with a degree of caution. Because once again, Iran continues to assert that it has a right of sovereignty over what vessels get through the Strait of Hormuz. We don't know what their plan is over the next couple of weeks, how many vessels are set to pass through. Remember, prior to the war, it was open and we'd see about 100 to 120 vessels passing through it a day. That's trickled down to less than half a dozen, if any at all. And whether that number goes up to, say, 10%, 15%, 20% of the total is yet to be seen. But that still means that we're going to be far away from this normal environment that existed. Plus, question marks really about how and where you find the compromise, given Iran are once again, exercising or wanting to exercise their right to sovereignty over the Strait. AP reporting that they're looking to set up a toll system in conjunction with Oman, whereby they'd have to start charging any vessels passing through the Strait to pay a certain fee. Clearly, that is a non-starter as well for many countries in the region and around the world as well, too. I would just say that in light of all of that, you have a huge backlog. You've got about 800 vessels sort of stranded in the Persian Gulf waiting to pass through. Plus, you have the question of some of the force majeures that key energy companies in the region have announced with their customers around the world. And the question of how much energy damage has actually been sustained at these sites, how long it's going to take for them to be back up and running again, how long is it going to take for the full repairs to be conducted. Again, all of this is going to take time to play out. And just to wrap things up, our colleagues were at an airline conference, the IATA, and they spoke to some key bosses over there. And they said, these are airline bosses suggesting that jet fuel prices will take months to normalize, and that is even assuming that Iran fully reopens the Strait of Hormuz in the next couple of days, which itself is a big ask.
Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison and Bloomberg Horizons anchor Jemana Bersetchi. Thank you both very much. Well, still ahead, more on the market reaction to the ceasefire with Sophie Huyn, Portfolio Manager and Strategist at BNP Paribas Asset Management. But first, we'll discuss whether this fragile ceasefire in the Middle East could lead to a lasting end to the war with National Security Institute founder and Executive Director Jamil Jaffer. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. The US and Iran have agreed to a temporary ceasefire at the 11th hour. That's after Pakistan implored President Trump to back down from his threats of unleashing massive devastation on Iran if his demands weren't met. Trump says the military campaign will be paused in exchange for Tehran reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm pleased to say to discuss now, joining me is National Security Institute founder and Executive Director Jamil Jaffer. Jamil, good to see you. I wonder, do you see this as President Trump kicking the can down the road, or is it a solid step towards actually ending this war?
Well, look, we're not really sure, Lizzie, because what we've done is we've seen this 10-point peace plan from the Iranians. We've seen allegations about what's in it. Obviously, as your earlier correspondence indicated, there are a lot of pieces that the U.S. just can't go along with. And so we'll see if this is really a basis for negotiations, as the president said. And if it is, and there's a path forward here, that's great. But it's hard to see the Iranians agreeing to the kind of things that President Trump has talked about, ending their role in terrorism in the region, ending their nuclear program, particularly when they're saying the U.S. has accepted enrichment by Iran of nuclear capabilities, uranium, that is. And that we've accepted their control of the Straits of Hormuz, which the United States has never agreed to, given that it's an international waterway.
What do you think it was that brought Iran to the negotiating table? Was it President Trump's threats to, that a whole civilization would die tonight? When, Iran had shown willingness to act against its own people if it meant that the regime would stay in power. Is it surprising to you then that it agreed to this ceasefire?
No, look, I think that Iran right now realizes that it has something of an advantage in the sense that even though its navy has been decimated, its air defense capabilities have been significantly reduced, and its military has been cut down, not to mention the loss of its supreme leader. At the same time, I think they recognize that with the world price of oil skyrocketing, the president's demands the Strait of Hormuz be reopened, they had an opportunity here to give the president something he wanted, the Straits of Hormuz reopened, and try to get a deal on the table, or at least a negotiation that might work in their favor. And if there's any truth to that, some parts of that 10-point peace plan are really the basis for negotiations, well, then Iran may have gotten a significant gain. That would be a mistake for the United States, and hopefully the president is unwilling to give Iran what's demanding: domestic enrichment, this access to control of the Straits of Hormuz, complete cessation of hostilities with respect to its terrorist proxies who've been engaged in a war against the United States and our allies for decades now. So if those are on the table, and that's what really is up for negotiation, that could be a real problem for the United States and our allies, not just in the region, but around the globe.
Well, yeah, is it not a huge concession to Iran that, yes, Tehran is allowing free passage through the Strait of Hormuz for 2 weeks, but it's in coordination with Iran's armed forces?
No, that's exactly right. If that's the trade, one, you have to coordinate with the Iranian Navy, that you have to pay them potentially a multi-million-dollar toll. That's hugely problematic and not something that the United States or any of our allies in the region, frankly, should accept. That's an international waterway. It's been deemed as such for decades because it's a choke point between two major waterways. So no nation is controlling that. It's international waters. And the idea that Iran would assert control over it simply because it is true today that Iran, because of its military sort of efforts in the region, is controlling that strait. But in the past, U.S. presidents have actually said we're going to enforce the rule of law. We're going to allow ships through there, and we're going to escort them if need be. If you remember the tanker wars in the 1980s, that was what that was all about, and that's been a longstanding U.S. and frankly international position. Not one country in the world recognizes Iran's control of the Straits of Hormuz because it's an international waterway and a choke point.
So how much face has Trump really saved here? How much closer are the US and Iran in terms of their respective demands than when the war began?
Well, they're pretty far apart. The U.S. put out a 15-point proposal for peace, which has a lot of things that we've talked about: ending the nuclear program, giving up domestic enrichment, reducing their ballistic missile capabilities, stopping supporting terror around the region and around the globe with Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and the like. The Iranians responded with a 5-point peace plan that had, a 5-point plan initially, and now a 10-point plan, but a 5-point plan that had none of that, just had the U.S. ceasing hostilities. And now their 10-point plan is sort of, it offers something for the Iranians. The only thing it really offers on the table is the opening of the Straits of Hormuz. It doesn't really offer a whole lot else. That's a huge problem. And so we remain pretty far apart, even though the president has indicated, one, this is the basis for negotiations, and two, that we're not that far apart. So that's what he's saying publicly. Maybe there are negotiations going on behind the scenes with Vice President J.D. Vance, and Witkoff and the other folks involved, Jared Kushner. If, in fact, we are closer to a deal, that would be great to see what that looks like. But as of right now, the parties will look pretty far apart based on what they're saying publicly, at least.
Yeah, how likely is it that this ceasefire will turn into a permanent end to the war? Do you see it as a rolling 2 weeks, given that the two sides are so far apart?
I do think there's a desire on both sides to bring this conflict to a conclusion. I think President Trump obviously is tired of the war. He's not satisfied with where gas prices are at. He's obviously deeply concerned about that as a domestic political matter, and frankly, as an international matter. He hasn't got the support he wanted from the allies to reopen the straits, so he's in a tough situation. At the same time, the Iranians have had their military hit very hard. They've been embarrassed publicly. Their air capacity has been decimated. Their ballistic missile launch capability and their drone launch capability is essentially wiped out or significantly harmed. They still have a lot of missiles. They still have a lot of drones, but their ability to launch them is harmed. And so they need some time to rebuild that capacity. So what has to happen here, if the U.S. is to continue to prosecute this war successfully, is to get a real resolution that gets the Iranians to come down and come off where they are today. That's going to be hard to do without new pressure on them. So we'll see how this plays out. But right now, it's going to be a tough negotiation on both sides. Could lead to a restart in hostilities. That would not be good for anybody involved. And yet, the Iranians don't seem to think today they really need to negotiate, other than opening up the Straits of Hormuz.
So, Jamil, it's already fragile. How much more precarious does it make this ceasefire that Israel is saying the deal doesn't extend to Lebanon? Do you believe that Israel is fully on board here?
Well, the president said that Israel is on board. Israel's saying they're not completely on board. It's hard to imagine them getting on board with any of the things in the 10-point plan that Iran has laid out. And look, Israel has always taken the position that Lebanon's a separate matter, that they've been going after Lebanon for years and years, regardless of what's happening in Iran. They obviously, Lebanon in part controlled in part by the Iranian proxy Hezbollah. That's obviously a problem for Israel and will continue to be a problem as long as that remains the case. There's no sign that that's coming to an end. And so I would be surprised if Israel believes that Lebanon's part of the game. And if they are part of this ceasefire negotiation, then I think Israel's going to extract from the negotiations. They're going to want to be at the table. They're going to be part of those negotiations. And they're going to extract real concessions about Hezbollah that can be enforced. It's hard to see Iran giving up that critical proxy in the region.
Jamil, we appreciate you staying up late for us. That's National Security Institute founder and executive director Jamil Jaffer. Thank you very much. Well, coming up on the programme, oil prices plunged below $100 a barrel after the US and Iran agree to this 2-week ceasefire. We'll bring you more on that dramatic reversal later on. This is Bloomberg. Corporate news. UBS has failed to convince a US judge to issue a ruling clarifying that a 1999 settlement protects the bank from new Holocaust-related financial claims. The judge dismissed the bank's request to define the $1.25 billion accord more clearly, saying that no active lawsuit or motion before him. Elsewhere, Apple shares reversed losses after news that its first foldable phone is said to be on track to arrive during the company's normal iPhone launch period later this year. Sources say Apple is scheduled to introduce the model in September, and shares initially fell after a report from the Nikkei Asia said the company was facing engineering test challenges, fueling concerns about a delay. And Anthropic is letting some tech firms access a more powerful, unreleased AI model to help prepare for possible cyber attacks that might result from making the system available more widely. The model, called Mythos, will hunt for flaws in the products and share findings with industry peers. Anthropic is forming an initiative with companies like Amazon and Apple and will use that project to inform guardrails for the technology. Well, coming up on Daybreak Europe, as relief sweeps through the markets, we'll get the view from Sophie Wynne, portfolio manager and strategist at BNP Paribas Asset Management. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. Oil tumbles and stocks surge as the US and Iran agree to a 2-week ceasefire if Tehran reopens the Strait of Hormuz. But a path to a permanent deal remains unclear. President Trump, meanwhile, says the US will help ease congestion in the vital waterway as the agreement is said to allow Iran and Oman to charge transit fees on ships. Plus, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu backs the pause on strikes on Iran, but says the truce does not include Lebanon. We'll bring you all the latest throughout the hour. Well, a very good morning if you're just joining us. 6:30 a.m. here in London, and we see relief sweeping across these markets this morning. You can see stocks already jumping in Asia, driven by Japan and Korea, but really outsized moves for Euro Stoxx 50 futures this morning, up more than 5%, and futures pointing higher on the other side of the Atlantic as well. S&P E-minis up 2.5% too. Now flip the board to the cross-asset picture, and we have oil plunging the most in almost 6 years, below $100 a barrel on both WTI and Brent. Brent now down nearly 14%. And meanwhile, treasuries rallying across the curve as traders bet that Fed cuts will be coming back. So 4.23 is where we trade on the 10-year. Gold also climbing on the prospect of lower rates. We're at $4,818 a troy ounce. Taking a look at your front pages now, and no surprises, the ceasefire is dominating the headlines around the world. We start off with the Financial Times, and they're leading with the US and Iran agreeing to this 2-week ceasefire that would see the Strait of Hormuz reopened shortly before Donald Trump's deadline for Tehran to meet his demands or face devastating strikes. Similarly, if we turn over to the Wall Street Journal, their top story says President Trump agreed to suspend attacks on Iran if the key waterway was immediately reopened, pointing to progress on a 10-point proposal from Tehran. And if we turn to El País out of Spain, they're reporting that the US and Iran agreed to this 2-week ceasefire just before Trump's ultimatum expired. The mediator, Pakistan, specifying in the agreement that it applies to all countries involved in the conflict. But you can get a roundup of all the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak, which terminal subscribers can find by going to DAYB Go. Well, turning to one of the significant market consequences of this ceasefire, we've seen oil prices plunging below $100 a barrel after the US and Iran agreed to that 2-week ceasefire. The deal involves halting military action in exchange for Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz to global shipping traffic. And we can get more now with Bloomberg's Middle East energy reporter, Anthony Di Paola. Anthony, good morning. Just tell us what more we know about this agreement to reopen the waterway.
Good morning, Lizzie. We can see from the oil market that it's a huge sigh of relief by a lot of traders and oil buyers with that big drop. Frankly, going into this with the level of destruction that Donald Trump was promising if a deal wasn't reached, it seemed like oil was rather complacent pricing going into this. So we've seen that this big sign of relief. What we're going to need to see really is movement of vessels. So we're really going to be watching how open the opening of the Strait of Hormuz is. There is a lot of a backlog of vessels inside the Persian Gulf with a lot of oil already loaded, oil and products. We're going to have to see those moving out. I think that will probably be one of the priorities in terms of the shippers who have had vessels in there, some of them up to 4 weeks waiting in the Gulf, as well as to the oil producers want to get those vessels moved. And then we will have to see whether that backlog of vessels outside of the Strait of Hormuz in the Gulf of Oman, off of ports like Fujairah in the UAE, if those do start entering into the Gulf and loading more oil there to get oil out to the markets. This is a temporary ceasefire, 2 weeks. So there may be some skepticism around whether that is going to hold or whether that's going to be able to be continued. But we would expect to see producers and shippers doing everything that they can to get as much oil on the market during this 2-week window, Lizzie.
Well, yeah, you wonder what the floor is going to be on the oil price here, because there's also the question of how long it'll take the market to get back to pre-conflict levels of supply.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that we can talk about that yet because we don't have a permanent deal here. We don't have a permanent and reliable opening of the Strait of Hormuz yet. And I think that is going to be one of the key factors, how reliable and how trustworthy that opening is, because that's key for the free flow of oil and all the products. That's what will allow oil to come out of storage, to allow producers in the Gulf who, remember, shut in some fields, ramped down production, that will allow them to raise that and bring that back to market. So we're going to have to see reliability of the ability of the flows before we can talk about getting back to normal. We've got a lot of work to do in terms of resupplying industries, vital industries like refineries, like petrochemical plants, particularly in Asia. That hit to supplies was starting to get into Europe, where we've already seen high costs, potentially even moving across the Atlantic and then affecting the U.S. Prices there have also been very high, while we haven't seen the actual shortages of the products. So we're very far off getting back to normal yet, and we'll need to see a durable either ceasefire or peace that people trust with that opening of Hormuz in order to get back to normal, in order to give people the confidence to start navigating through Hormuz and to ramp production back up. So we've got some ways to go yet before we get there, Lizzie.
Anthony, thank you for the update. That's Anthony DePaula, Bloomberg's Middle East energy reporter. Well, checking in on these markets more broadly, when we look at futures and stocks trading already in Asia, we had seen the MSCI Asia Pacific Index just moments ago gaining by more than 5% this morning. And that optimism, that relief reflected on both sides of the Atlantic as well. Notably, Euro Stoxx 50 futures now up more than 5% too, 5.2%. And stateside, we've got S&P E-minis up 2.5%. NASDAQ futures really powering ahead here, up 3.25% as we head towards the Wall Street session. Well, let's get more now with Sophie Wynn, portfolio manager and strategist for dynamic asset allocation over at BNP Paribas Asset Management. Good morning, Sophie. Really wild moves we're seeing today, and I got to hand it to you because your notes said that TACO remains a base case, and that was before we even passed this deadline. You weren't wrong. What's it going to take for this rally to hold?
So the question is whether it's a relief rally or it's going to be a dead cat bounce, because it's still a 2-week ceasefire, and I think all eyes are going to be on the Strait of Hormuz and how many ships are going to go through day after day. Because if you look across regions and across countries, the rationing measure due to the oil shortage have intensified since the Easter weekend. So what's going to be the impact on growth on one side, and how long it's going to take for oil to reach these countries as the Strait of Hormuz potentially opens is, I think, the key question.
So do you think markets are currently overestimating the extent to which this ceasefire will lead to a sustainable resolution to the war?
I think at this point it's still the PTSD of TACO, as in we've been through Liberation Day, there's been a TACO, now we're wondering if it's the same. But this time around, I think monitoring the barrels of oil physically is going to be much more important than rhetoric that could circulate around for the next 2 weeks. And the question I have is, are we going to go back to pre-Iran conflict, where the regime we were in was expansionary due to AI spending, due to the benefit from the rate cutting cycle we've been through? But right now, has the damage been already feeding through the economy, where ahead of us we're going to have a slowdown? If you look at the equity market consensus expectation, there hasn't been any downgrades of earnings growth for this year whatsoever across regions, which is very surprising.
OK, interesting. And nice to know that for you, what matters more is what really is happening on the ground when it comes to passage of ships through the Strait, real-world attacks, rather than any reports of progress that we hear out of these talks that will be happening between the two sides. Just turning to the bond space, we're seeing Treasury yields up across the curve, down across the curve this morning. I want to play you a little bit of what the Fed's John Williams told our very own Mike McKee just yesterday.
I think it will directly go into headline inflation because energy prices are an important component of that. So I expect headline inflation to actually be elevated, in the middle of this year. Of course, if energy prices come back down or stabilize, then that won't add more to inflation. So right now, my view on inflation is we're looking at an inflation rate for the year as a whole of something like 2.75%. But of course, it depends what happens with energy prices.
So, of course, Williams, they're thinking about the impact of the Middle East war on inflation and the Federal Reserve. But now, when we have this repricing happening this morning, Sophie, how many cuts do you think we could be seeing from the Fed this year?
So I think in terms of central banks pricing, what we need to take into account is this time around, we potentially have higher oil price compared to pre-Iran level. So there's going to be a premium, not because of the toll tax, but like shipping costs being more expensive, insurance as well. Against that, the fact that the fiscal leeway is not the same as 2022, I think from my perspective, the central bank's pricing will be more skewed towards rate cuts. So we might be seeing 2 or potentially 3, but it all depends on how much the economy is going to behave in the next couple of months, I would say, where for now, we haven't seen the impact of the Iran conflict on consumer sentiment, on the labor market data. So I think this will be heavily monitored over the next couple of weeks through the high-frequency one or the monthly prints. But clearly, I think what worries me a bit more is the ceasefire comes against a backdrop where positioning is not at capitulation, as we've seen to Liberation Day. It's a bit below neutral. So I think the outcome at this point for markets is still binary. So I wouldn't call this relief rally potentially to be sustained. I'm just wondering if it's going to be a dead cat bounce, where I think we're overlooking the potential gas situation, especially in Europe, ahead of the next winter.
OK. And therefore, with that uncertainty remaining, is gold a good place to turn? Many talking about gold again because we've got Fed cuts potentially back on the table.
So gold is still this portfolio allocation that you need to play currency debasement, de-dollarization. So I think it still makes sense where it has been this high-performing asset in the portfolio that you would liquidate first, given the positive equity bond correlation we've been through for the past 6 weeks. Looking forward, Chinese central banks is still buying. I think central banks overall are still buying. And the Middle East situation is still, I think, pushing towards further diversification out of the US dollar, where I think the thematic of petrodollar is really at the center point of what's happening.
Just finally, Sophie, coming back to your idea that TACO was the base case, what was it that gave you faith that President Trump would want to de-escalate in this conflict? Was it the price of gasoline in a year of the midterms? Was it the fear of casualties? What do you see as the limit on President Trump?
I think it's kind of like, yeah, you have the midterms coming, but at the same time, if you look at what this Iran conflict is impacting the most, I think it's the Asian region. So it's kind of like this proxy war we've been going through between the US and to some extent China. So I think to some extent that's what the market has been pricing as well, as in it was not sustainable. You couldn't have for a long period of time zero flow coming out of the Strait of Hormuz apart from Iran. So the situation was unsustainable, but I think it was also the base scenario of markets if you look at the price action and positioning. So looking forward, we could have a TACO, but my concern remains that the pickup of chips going through the Strait of Hormuz is not going to be enough, and the economic impact are going to be a drag for the near future.
OK, Sophie, we appreciate your analysis this morning. That's Sophie Wynn, Portfolio Manager and Strategist for Dynamic Asset Allocation over at BNP Paribas Asset Management. Thank you. Well, as we gear up for the start of the European cash trade later on, just some of the names that are set to see outside moves today include Total Energies and Eni, both indicated lower on TradeGate this morning. TUI, on the flip side, indicated higher, as is Siemens Energy. And this is in the context of Euro Stoxx 50 futures higher 5.25% at the moment. We've already seen gains in the Asian session. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index up over 5% in the past hour, just shy of that now. And we're looking for gains in the US session as well. Both S&P E-minis and NASDAQ futures higher. S&P E-minis up 2.5%. NASDAQ futures up 3.2%. All on the back of this announcement of a 2-week ceasefire between the US and Iran, and oil prices plunging. Brent now down 14% at $93 a barrel. Well, coming up just days before Hungary heads to the polls, US Vice President J.D. Vance endorses Prime Minister Viktor Orban and criticises the European Union. More on that story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, 6:48 a.m. here in London. Well, the conflict in the Middle East, as we know, has seriously disrupted jet fuel supplies, putting a strain on the global aviation industry. IATA's Director General Willie Walsh says that a 2-week ceasefire is critical for getting those refined products moving again.
We hopefully will see some flow of oil return, which will be a positive. So the airline industry has been impacted by both the supply of crude, but more importantly, the supply of the refined product, because a lot of jet kerosene was refined in the region, and that obviously is dependent on reopening the straits as well.
IATA Director General Willie Walsh there on some of the real-world impacts of the war in the Middle East. Well, in perhaps another dimension of this increasingly interventionist White House, J.D. Vance has criticised the European Union for allegedly meddling in the Hungarian election. The US Vice President then endorsed Viktor Orban as a model of leadership for the continent days before the make-or-break vote.
What has happened in the midst of this election campaign is one of the worst examples of foreign election interference that I've ever seen or ever even read about. The bureaucrats in Brussels have tried to destroy the economy of Hungary. They have tried to make Hungary less energy independent. They have tried to drive up costs for Hungarian consumers, and they've done it all because they hate this guy.
Now, Vance, we should note, provided no evidence for his claims, and no EU leader has campaigned alongside the Hungarian opposition in the election. But let's get more now with Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook. So, Ollie, Vance is accusing Europe of interference, but is that not what the US is doing by endorsing Orban?
There's something of a paradox here, Lizzie, and it's something, he's just the latest of a number of American officials over the last couple of months who effectively come to Hungary and campaign alongside the incumbent Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who faces the polls on Sunday for his 4th consecutive term as Prime Minister and facing very tall odds to do so, Lizzie. He's behind in the polls by about 8 to 10 points, depending on where you look. And what we heard from J.D. Vance was effectively a number of shots at, the EU bureaucrats. He mentioned them about 5 times, very sort of ambiguously saying that energy policy within Europe is trying to bring down the Hungarian prime minister and is really destructive to the Hungarian people. We should say that Hungary is one of the only very few EU nations that has an exception, that actually is allowed to buy Russian crude oil because it is a landlocked country. So not clear exactly what he's referring to, but that builds on a tradition. We saw Marco Rubio after the Munich Security Conference. He only visited 2 nations. One was Budapest and Hungary to speak alongside Viktor Orban, basically saying that things will go better for the Hungarians in their relationship with the United States if they re-elect Viktor Orban. We had President Trump speaking at a Hungarian CPAC event via video call a couple of weeks ago. So again, all of this will really amount to the final attempt by the U.S. administration to tip the scales in favor of the president's friend, Viktor Orban, and somebody who they see as a close political ally to their MAGA project.
Oliver, thank you very much. That's Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook, who's bringing us full coverage of that election, of course. Plenty more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
The Iranians saying they will allow free passage for the next 2 weeks through the Strait of Hormuz, but in coordination with Iran's armed forces. If the U.S. agrees to that, that is a huge concession to Iran.
Trump has essentially recognized this was an unwinnable war. He had to take an exit.
I think markets will shift lower with that confidence, but it is going to be very tricky.
I'm cautiously optimistic because I think for the past 1 month and a bit more, this is the first time where both the US and Iran and also Israel actually are pausing their military action, at least for the time being.
Some of our guests reacting to the US-Iran 2-week ceasefire, and the market reaction really has been stark overnight. We've seen stocks and stock futures climbing, oil plunging, and Fed rate cut bets revived. So take a look at the relation between treasuries and gold. You can see that as treasury yields have fallen, that's the blue line, gold seems to have found its feet. That's the white line here. So gold climbing, and meanwhile, if we flip the board over, really that volatility in treasuries has pretty much crashed. The calm returning to this market, helped also by the overnight Fed speak. And flip the board one more time, because it seems like the correlation between oil and US treasuries is getting past its peak. So yields falling as the risks to growth are at the fore. Now let's take a look at the risk events on the docket for today. At 7 a.m. London time, we get the latest German factory orders data. At 10 a.m. we have Euro area retail sales numbers. And at 7 p.m. London time, we'll get the latest Fed minutes, perhaps hawkish in flavour, which will be interesting given the new geopolitical backdrop. But of course, the question remains, how permanent will this ceasefire be? How sustainable a resolution to this war will it be? That will be the question that will dominate these markets. So let's just take a look at where we are in markets right now. Euro Stoxx 50 futures notably higher more than 5%, 5.4% at this point as we head towards the European cash trade. Really outstanding to see this sort of moves at this time of the morning. But Brent also falling on the ceasefire. Both Brent and WTI below $100 a barrel. 93.77 is where we trade, down 14% more than at this point. Gold, meanwhile, on this prospect of lower rates, perhaps higher by 2.7%. $4,833 a troy ounce is where we trade. Could this be where you want to be, given the uncertainty in geopolitics will continue? Guy Johnson and Anna Edwards will be up next with the opening trade. They'll take you all the way to the start of the European cash session, and it's likely to be an exciting one. That's next. This is Bloomberg.